I remember when I first struggled with depersonalization, it was quite distressing for me. I remember vividly feeling lifeless, like I was in a dream, and that I couldn't access parts of my emotional self any longer. To me, it felt like I was drifted outside of myself, looking inward. It just was the oddest sensation, and I remember often feeling like I was trapped in a prison, but two prisons. One where my emotional self was subtracted from my other self. It's a very, very odd feeling. Feeling out of touch with reality, feeling like I was in an altered state of reality, feeling detached from myself. Very odd and distressing sensations for sure. I struggled with that for a number of years during my struggle with anxiety disorder. I was really bothered by it because I thought surely I was having a complete emotional break, and I didn't ever think that I'd be able to get myself back again. I know it seems kind of odd to be talking about it that way at that time, but that's how it felt. It just was such a separation from myself. It was dreamlike, unreal state, not really connected to myself or the world or what I thought were my loved ones at that time. It was just a really distressing sensation. As I learned more about it, and I recognized it was attached to stress, and I started working at my recovery as I got my body stressed down and worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. Eventually, that depersonalization feeling started to lift, and over the course of time, like all the other symptoms I had, it eventually slowly disappeared until it wasn't no longer an issue. But it was certainly distressing for me, so I can understand when people experience it. It just feels so odd and also hard to describe. Because these feelings are described in subjective terms. Everyone have a different explanation for it, but essentially it's the same thing. So depersonalization is a common symptom of elevated stress, and especially the stress caused by being overly anxious. So even though it can feel odd during the moment, it is just another artifact of elevated stress, and it too will leave when you work at dealing with your anxiety issues, getting your body stressed out, and give your body ample time to recover. So it's not something we have to worry about when we're experiencing it. Just recognize it can feel odd, but it is just an artifact of stress, and it too will completely disappear when you resolve your anxiety issues. The other thing to keep in mind is that even though it can feel really bizarre, it's not an indication of anything that's serious. I know I used to think that it was, again, being caused by beginnings of an emotional break or an emotional meltdown that I would never get myself back from, but that's just not the case. Depersonalization is just merely an artifact of elevated stress, and therefore we don't have to worry about it. It's not an indication of a serious mental issue. It's really just an indication of what the body can do when the body's stress is really elevated. As I said, reducing your stress, dealing with your anxiety issues, giving your body ample time, this whole thing will resolve and it'll clear off once and for all. I've never experienced it again over the course of the last 27 or so years, but it is an indication of how stressed my body was and what a body can do when it becomes that overly stressed. So again, nothing to worry about, no reason to be concerned about it. It's not an indication of anything other than elevated stress and what the body does in response. For more information about this symptom, you can visit our website under the symptom depersonalization. Just visit our anxiety symptoms page and then scroll down till you get depersonalization. We have a description there. And recovery support members can get a more in-depth description in the recovery support area in Chapter 9 under the symptom depersonalization. Since I experienced all of the symptoms we list at our website, I have to say that there were a few that were really difficult for me. One was dizziness, because once it came, I had intense waves of dizziness that made me feel awful, and it lingered longer than any of my other symptoms. And depersonalization was another one. When it first showed up, I had no idea what was happening to me. I thought, sure enough, this was a precursor to a complete mental breakdown. And because I had no idea what was happening and it felt so awful, I really had a hard time containing my fears about it initially. And because depersonalization was such an unusual feeling, I didn't want to tell my doctor or anyone else about it because I thought surely they would think I was going insane. Keeping quiet about it and thinking that I may be going crazy really fueled my anxiety condition. I must say that those early days with depersonalization were quite awful. And when I struggled with depersonalization, my thoughts were weird and scattered and disconnected. My reality seemed at a distance and unreachable. It felt like I was living in a dream and I couldn't find my way out of it. My actions seemed foreign and disconnected from my reality, and I often felt like I was living outside of myself, watching myself and the world around me. And many nights I went to sleep hoping that I'd wake up the next day and it would all be over, but day after day it returned. It really felt like I was living in a never-ending nightmare. Now, depersonalization can affect each of us slightly differently. For example, some of us may only experience brief episodes of feeling slightly detached, while others may experience intense and persistent episodes of feeling fully detached and separated from reality. I also experienced depersonalization in a variety of intensities and at different times during my struggle with anxiety disorder. Some episodes were brief and slight, while others were intense and lasting. During my struggle with depersonalization, I had lots of thoughts that seemed totally bizarre, and even though I knew they were bizarre, I had a hard time dismissing them. Many caused me great fear initially because they were so out of character, off the wall, and persistent. Now, depersonalization also affected my emotions. For example, my emotions were all over the map, often seemed wrong, and seemed at odds with how I knew I should feel. I remember there was a time when, even though I knew I loved my family, I had episodes where my emotions felt otherwise, or I felt no emotion at all. And that really scared me because I knew I loved them, but my emotion said something else. So my head was saying one thing, but emotionally I couldn't get there. And sometimes I had episodes where my true emotions flooded in, and to great degrees. The abundance of love I felt was overwhelming, but completely out of line with how I knew I should be feeling. Yet I couldn't figure out why. None of it made sense to me, and it was quite puzzling and distressing. I also had memory lapses where I couldn't remember things I normally would have, such as everyday phone numbers, names, places, and experiences. For example, I would come home from work and have dinner, yet an hour later I couldn't remember if I ate, and if so, what I had eaten. I also had problems with doing even simple everyday tasks because they even seemed confusing, wrong, foreign, and disconnected. For example, there were certain tasks at my job that I had become proficient at, yet when depersonalization occurred, I had a hard time making sense of them and struggled with even simple aspects of them. I also began to question everything, such as my relationships, what I was doing for a living, the purpose of life, and was life really worth living, and so on. Questions that I had previously come to terms with were now called into question. I said to myself countless times, what's wrong with me? I feel like I'm going insane. Why can't I snap out of this? And there were lots of times when I thought I would never feel normal again, and this scared me even more. On top of the depersonalization, I had other symptoms such as tunnel vision, where my peripheral vision was reduced and it felt like I was looking through a tunnel. I had crazy thoughts and a number of other symptoms, and it was a real cocktail of distressing sensations, disturbing thoughts, and erratic emotions. Many times I felt hopelessly trapped in a real-world hell, and again it often felt like I was living in a bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. And like dizziness, depersonalization lingered for what seemed like forever, even though I was faithfully working at my recovery. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and once I recovered, I've not experienced it again. And while it may seem like we minimize our concern about anxiety symptoms and the sensations and how they feel, I certainly know how debilitating and frightening they can be. As I've said before, I wouldn't wish some of these symptoms on anyone. They can be that awful. Nonetheless, like all other anxiety symptoms, we can recover from depersonalization. While depersonalization can linger for what may seem like a very long time, it does diminish and eventually disappear when we do the right work. Since all of our symptoms are related to stress hormone overstimulation, once we've effectively dealt with our stimulation and the body has had sufficient time to recover, it does eliminate symptoms completely, including this one, so there is good reason to be hopeful. Eliminating depersonalization is the same as eliminating any other anxiety-caused symptom. But based on my experience with depersonalization and based on the experiences of others, it may take longer to disappear than other symptoms. Depersonalization seems to be one of those symptoms that once it becomes entrenched, it can take a long time for the body to eliminate, even though we may be faithfully practicing our recovery strategies. Nevertheless, we can still get rid of it with perseverance. Now, a couple of common barriers to eliminating symptoms, including this one, are: Number 1, our worry and distress about our symptoms. Too many of us react to our symptoms emotionally rather than logically. Since we don't like how our symptoms feel, we worry about them and react to them with fear and distress. Unfortunately, behaving this way causes the body more stress, which works against recovery. And 2, we become focused on our symptoms, struggle with them, and fight against them. Again, unfortunately, approaching our symptoms this way causes stress, which again works against recovery. So fretting over, stressing about, and fighting with our symptoms is a sure way to cause them to persist. Because they can be powerful and persistent, I understand why we do this. But to recover, we have to contain our fretting and stress about our symptoms and have to faithfully practice our recovery strategies and for long enough so that the body can heal. This is the way to recovery. Again, since our symptoms are stress-related, once we remove stress and give the body sufficient time, it does return to normal health and eventually eliminates symptoms. Now, that said, it is important to remember that recovery isn't a smooth linear process where we get better and better each day. Rather, recovery often is a series of ups and downs and back and forths, with the feeling better periods mixed with bumpy periods until the better periods outnumber and outlast the bumpy periods. Eventually, the body gets to a point where it fully eliminates the bumpy periods and normal health ensues. So in the meantime, and until the body fully recovers, we have to adopt a passive acceptance approach, such as, yes, my symptoms may feel awful, and yes, my symptoms may be lingering way too long, and yes, my symptoms may come and go, but I don't care. I'm going to let them come and go, and I'm not going to react to them. I'm going to live my life the best I can until my normal health returns and my symptoms have disappeared. I'm not going to react to them anymore. Again, passive acceptance is the approach we want to take. Also, we have to be aware that if we have experienced our symptoms for some time, we may have developed a habit of anticipating them, imagining what they feel like, constantly checking for them, fearing that they will never leave, or fearing that they may return. We have to deliberately stop this behavior. Anticipating and ruminating about our symptoms can keep the body stressed and therefore prevent recovery. Remember, ruminating about our symptoms is worry, and worry is a learned behavior that stresses the body. But it's also a behavior we can learn to stop. And many of us spend too much time recalling than dwelling on the negative memories about our symptoms, how they made us feel, and how they impacted our life. Unfortunately, spending time with these negative experiences also stress the body. So we have to stop this behavior too. Yes, our past experiences can be harsh, and it's too bad they happened, yeah. But what's happened in the past is done, and there's nothing we can do about it now other than to move forward. If we want to move forward toward normal health, we need to refocus our attention and energy on living a normal life rather than dwelling on the past. All anxiety-caused symptoms disappear when we reduce our stress and for long enough for the body to return to normal health. Once the body returns to normal health, it eliminates all symptoms, including this one. Recovery works the same for everyone. It's not that it works for some people and not for others. Since the body works under certain principles, when you do the right things and for long enough, the body has to recover. So don't mislead yourself into thinking that recovery won't work for you. If I had a dime for every time I heard, well, maybe it won't work for me, I'd be rich. But if you've been working at your recovery for a while and believe you should be farther along, one of the reasons you may not be seeing suitable progress could be because of unresolved underlying factors. Unaddressed underlying factors can continue to invisibly stress the body. So if you aren't aware of them and the stress they are causing, your hard work at recovery could be undermined by the stress coming from these unresolved underlying factors. We have to make sure we've identified and are successfully addressing them so that the body isn't experiencing invisible stress, which can interfere with recovery. Addressing your underlying factors allows your body to recover and eliminate symptoms. If you don't know what your underlying factors are or haven't successfully addressed them, you may want to work with a therapist to help you work through this aspect of recovery. As we mentioned throughout the website, identifying and successfully addressing the underlying factors of anxiety is the most important work we can do to ensure recovery and lasting success. Yes, there's no question about it, depersonalization can be awful, but you can eliminate it by reducing stress, faithfully practicing your recovery strategies, adopting a passive acceptance approach to your symptoms, being patient, and getting on with your normal life as best you can. Once your body returns to normal health, it eliminates symptoms, including depersonalization.